Glad all of you were able to join us and hear a little bit more. Just as we kind of start the conversation today, I wanted to get a sense of kind of where people are in their sustainability. So if you feel like you've got all the money you need, you're all set for the next 15 years, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. I love it. All right, if you feel like you're kind of we're okay, we've got it figured out for the next 3 to 4 years, but we're kind of freaking out about what happens after that, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, we got one in the back. Who has no idea how their paycheck's going to be paid next month? Anybody? Okay. 2 years. So 2 years is kind of where you guys feel like you've got good funding. And I know there's a lot of conversations because many of us, I think, are operating under grants right now that have come down from federal funds that I think there's a conversation about those potentially not being available. And so the conversation today is really thinking about that long-term planning and diversifying your funding so that you have a good source of revenue. Typically, when I'm presenting, you're going to hear from both Rana and I today on the journeys we've taken. I am pretty authentic in my presentation style because I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so today I'm going to share with you some of what I've learned as we've gone on our journey of building sustainable funding for our organization. For context, I am Cami Welch. I'm out of Arvada, Colorado. Has anybody been to Arvada before? Okay, awesome. Great community. We have about 130,000 residents, 3,000 businesses. My team, we'll see if I get a text message during this presentation, is currently 7, but my board is interviewing 2 finalists for a position, so I'll be up to 8 in an hour if they give me the green light. So fingers crossed that goes well, but that's all been part of us growing our funding to be able to hire the team to do the work. But the reality is, on my journey, I've learned a lot of things the hard way, and I remember sitting in TPM Academy back in 2017 is when I went through that, and I think I asked 4 different times in a bunch of different ways, I'm so sorry, but how do you fund this? How does this work, right? Do employers pay? Who is funding this work? And there weren't the same level of federal dollars circulating at that time. So we had started a journey of having employers pay to participate in a collaborative work, which worked for us. It was a little bit self-sustaining, but certainly didn't allow us to do what we needed to do. So when we took a step back and we thought about, okay, we are the Arvada Chamber. Our mission as an organization is to solve the most critical challenges facing our business community. We were not able to do that. We weren't able to achieve our mission with our current funding model, which everybody I know has different models. Ours was membership, events, and then the little bit we were bringing in from our collaboratives. We could not do the work that needed to be done. There was nobody else doing it within our community, and we saw that we absolutely needed to take a focused attempt at achieving our mission. We also realized that on our team, nobody was waking up thinking about talent. I'd sometimes wake up in the middle of the night sweating thinking about it, but it wasn't a positive wake up, right? You want to wake up in the morning and somebody that's excited to go into work and really think about that talent component, which I know many of you get to do in your jobs, and that's incredible. We also were struggling with quality and consistency, and so we were having these wonderful starts and having a really hard time sustaining things, and then really thinking about scale and sustainability. So that's what got us to the point of doing a feasibility study. So we actually hired a company that is based out of Atlanta called Power 10. Some of you have talked to about this, so sorry for the repeat, Corey and others that have heard me say this before. And what Power 10 does is they run capital campaigns. But the first step in a good campaign process is to do a feasibility study, because you want to assess 3 things. You want to assess, do you truly understand the pain points of your business community? We knew talent was a pain point. We also had a sense that housing and childcare were pain points. We knew that policy was a pain point, but we didn't exactly understand how all that synced together and if we were just making that up or if our employers would agree with us. We also wanted to know if we had the authority as an organization to take on those issues. So testing with our employer community, do we have the trust in our community to take these on? And then here's the kicker. We wanted to know if our employer community would support us financially in doing this work. Not a $300 membership, but really support us in doing this work. So the feasibility study consisted of 50 one-on-one interviews with the Power 10 team. I was not part of those, so people could say whatever they wanted to say. Talk about losing sleep. That was scary for me because you don't know, how are we landing with our community? What does that look like? What they do at the end of that process is provide a report back to us that basically says, all right, you have a green light. Your community agrees these are the challenges. We had kind of nestled housing and childcare under talent as barriers to our talent system. Our business community said, those are big issues. Those are standalone goals. You need to prioritize those. They also told us that we needed to focus more on advocacy and policy. Colorado is right behind California in policy right now. Sorry, California friends. So we have to make sure that we're prioritizing how we think about pro-business policy for our community and region. So we heard that loud and clear. And our employers said, yeah, we would be willing to show up in new and different ways. So we moved forward with doing a campaign, which a campaign is a way of basically taking information and getting it all aggregated and then going out and talking to those who have interest. And so we developed a plan. Our plan is called Bold 2026. If you go to the arvadachamber.org website, the whole plan is up there. You can see exactly what I presented to employers, and that might be a helpful tool for you to use. But when we talk about having a plan, we want to make sure that we're understanding the challenge. And so as we were going to talk to employers about the talent issue, we needed good data. What were we talking about? And I'll tell you, one of the things that we talked a lot about, and this all came from our work in TPM, was the lack of consistent systems in our region. There was this huge gap in how systems were working together. We also needed to be clear about our goal, be specific, state our outcomes, and be clear on our budget requests. So when we put our plan together, those were the key elements that we were putting in front of employers as we went out and sold this. So BOLD stands for Big Opportunities for Leaders to Deliver. One of our key strategies, when I say be specific, was about launching employer collaboratives. So we in 2017 had launched TPM. We went through and had great collaboratives, had some early wins through that process. We built really great relationships. We identified key pain points. And out of our early work, we actually now have career hubs launching in every high school in our county, which is amazing. And our employers were proud of that. So we had enough kind of initial infrastructure to be able to move forward with a more robust plan and a little bit of a trust us, we've done some work. TPM definitely helped us to get to that point. Lesson number 2, maybe, is to understand your funding options. And so this is where the sustainability piece really, really comes in. And I know Rana is going to talk a lot about this too, so I'll keep this brief. But our goal when we launched this campaign is we wanted 70% private sector funding. Does anybody funded by private sector right now? Are employers truly funding? Awesome. And that was our goal, is we believed this truly needed to be employer-led, and employers needed to be the primary funding source of our work. Public sector investment, we said 30%. Foundations was another bucket we went after, and we kind of lumped them into our private sector funding bucket, but there were some dollars in foundations that made a lot of sense for us to go after. Again, thinking about sustainability, those are relationships that can be built for the long term. Same thing with private sector, making sure those are really clear. And then some specific grants. Like we got a grant that allows us, and this is where creativity had to come into place. Colorado has the Next Gen Sector Partnership Model. They launched a grant that was basically hire a full-time employee to do sector partnership work. And so I wrote it talking about collaboratives. And they sent me an email. They're like, by collaboratives, do you mean sector partnerships? And I said, sure. Fine, right? Like, I'll call it whatever you want to call it. Help me get a position funded through this. And so just being creative and understanding what you're saying yes to is really important. The next learning for us was feel your funder's pain. So I had to learn a lot because, to be quite frank, I'm a terrible salesperson. Because I am so just like, let's just talk and everything's great, right? And so I would get in there with funders. And so Power 10, the company we hired, they actually were with us every single time we did one of these asks, which I thought was going to be really cringy at first when I heard that that's how it was going to go. But they did a really good job of researching in advance, knowing what we were asking that employer for, to say, we're going to go in and say, we would like you to consider a $20,000 a year investment in this work. And here's why. But we understood their pain. We knew going in that talent was their biggest issue, and we would talk specifically to the pain points related to talent. And then the best lesson I got out of this is they told me to shut up. And I was like, whoa, because we would do the ask, and like me being the people pleaser that I am, I'd want to like fill the space after the ask with like, whatever you think, like it's okay. And they're like, you need to let people process, right? You need to give them time and space. So do the ask and then be quiet. And we had a lot of success with being able to go out and do that meeting one-on-one, that high-touch, hand-to-hand combat. It takes work. You can't just send out an email. It was back-to-back meetings with our potential funders. We did end up raising about $3 million in our campaign, which was really an exciting opportunity because we went from being an organization with an annual budget of $500,000 to now we're rolling at about $1.5 million. And that happened within a 6-month window that we were able to do it by putting the structure and the plan together to be able to go and ask employers what exactly they wanted and how we could help deliver on them. I do want to note, mo money, mo problems, right? It's all well and good, and this is where I say choose who you're getting funded by wisely, right? Private sector dollars typically are going to be more unrestricted, and you have more flexibility with that, but have a plan for capacity, and that was something that I messed up on is we started getting grants, and it was all well and good till the first grant report was due, and I was like, dang it! I didn't realize this was going to be in that they wanted it tracked. We just finished going through a monitoring process with the state for the SLFRF funds, and that was a journey and a lot of learning in that. And so making sure to build in capacity with those dollars you're receiving. Read grant agreements 10 times because actually we caught the state was telling us we couldn't do something, and I was able to be like, actually our agreement says we can. So being really clear and understanding the language is really important. Have clear financial policies. I have really good ones now because of the exercise. So if you need financial policies, call me. I'll give you my great policies because it's been a lot of work to get them great. And then ensure proper tracking. So I know some of that seems remedial, but when you were new to some of these grants and opportunities, I learned a lot. Go ahead, Marian.
You were saying that this capital campaign was it for, just for over 40. So I want to make sure it should be on. When you did the capital campaign, did you do it for the chamber as a 501c6 or a 3?
Great question. So we evaluated all of that at the front end of our campaign, and where we landed was to actually do a donor-designated fund through our local foundation. So we were able to manage that without having to launch a whole nother organization, because again, we're a small team, and I was worried about the capacity of adding a full nonprofit organization, so we got creative, and so those who wanted to do individual contributions to the work, the $1,000 a year, whatever that could be, could do it through that fund, and then actually the foundation that we set that fund up through was able to invest $500,000 into our work and just put it into that fund, and then we draw down on the fund every quarter, which works really well for us. Yes. Oh, hold on. You're going to get a microphone.
I do a lot of grant writing in my work, and I've also been on the grant making side. And one thing I find is funders really don't want to spend, they don't want to fund operational dollars, they want to fund programmatic dollars.
Yes.
So when you're doing a capital campaign, that's $3 million. How are you justifying the funding and making sure that you're providing enough programmatic components for them to fund?
Yeah, so if we go back to this slide right here where I talk about be specific. So when you go online and you download our whole plan, it basically is like, here's the challenges we're trying to solve. Here's the goal we want to achieve. So we want to decrease the number of unfilled high demand positions in our region. That is our goal. And then there's about 4 pages of strategies of exactly how we're going to work on recruiting, retaining, educating. And so we were very specific in the plan and very upfront, but also transparent in the spirit of like, that may change. That may not be exactly where we land in a year because we're trying to learn alongside. We're trying to still gather data and understand exactly what that needs to be. But that upfront transparency about the programmatic and tactical side was really critical to being able to do that. I know there's so many questions, and I want Rana to be able to go. So we'll do it, maybe save time for questions at the end, Jamie, if that's okay. So my second to last lesson is over-communicate your wins. And so this has been a big learning for us is people are investing in our work. And even though it seems silly, I always joke, if a tree falls and no one hears it, did it actually happen, right? So we have to tell people the big and little wins. So you'll see me post like, just got back from DC at TPM Summit, and it's part of the work, and you have to tell that story. We've also developed really robust dashboards that are getting ready to go live. You can't find them on our website now, but what we're tracking is leading and lagging indicators and how we're actually putting these interventions in place to test and prove that things are working. So we're testing our collaboratives and employer engagement and ultimately know as we do that. And so we're building these dashboards across all the pillars of BOLD. So talent, housing, childcare, advocacy, all have their own dashboards. Again, we have templates. They're going to go live here next quarter. We do quarterly reports to all of our investors. We do stories of impact, so the real qualitative examples of how the work is impacting our community. We do an annual investor briefing. We actually bring in our state demographer to talk about the data and what's happening, because that helps people connect like the big picture to the work on the ground. And then we also do one-on-one meetings. So every year I meet with each of our investors individually to understand, like, hey, do you really get what we're doing? How do you want to plug in? It is that hand-to-hand combat that is so important to the success of that. I lied, that was the last one. So we'll save questions, and I'll let you come up and do your thing.
All right, well, some height adjustments first, for those of us that aren't as tall. I want to first start by just saying thank you. I'm going to share a little bit of a personal story because I think it's important for you to know the work that you guys are doing. I came here to the United States in 2001 as an international student. English was a third language. I spoke very little English at the time. I started at Cal State Northridge to get my MBA and at a data entry level position. 9 years later, 2009, I was hired as a local chamber executive. So the work you're doing is important and impacts lives. So the diversity workshop that we were in, the panel, two of you guys are here. The work you're doing is critical. And for people like me, I can express my gratitude for how you've impacted many lives. So thank you. A little bit about what I do. I've been a chamber executive for 14 years, since 2009, and I've recently joined the Roseville Area Chamber 2 years ago. I have been following, though, the TPM program. Many years before that, we're in SoCal. I've tried to launch TPM for many years in LA, and it was almost impossible. Lots of roadblocks, lack of funding, lack of support. Moving to Roseville in October of 2021 and joining the Roseville Area Chamber, that's a 5-star accredited chamber by the U.S. Chamber. I'm going to say thank you to another great program of the U.S. Chamber, just giving us credibility in our community for people to really build trust with our organization, and really knowing that we follow best practices in the industry and the Chamber of Commerce. So we have great relationship with our 1,200 members and our community at large, and our city council and local elected officials. So really that established trust within the community, and that's gonna tell, my story is a little different than our Arvada Chamber and many of you who maybe rely mostly on private funding. When I joined the chamber in October of 2021, I started doing outreach and just talking to our members and understanding their pain points. We haven't done any workforce development initiatives before that. Started hearing what you most have been hearing is talent is a challenge. Our pain points is finding the right employees. We're stealing from each other. So really hearing the pain point, and just I reached out to Jamie again. I said, I think I'm in a different community. I think we can make TPM happen there. It happened a lot quicker than I expected to be, and maybe before I was even ready to engage in TPM. I attended the Cap to Cap trip, the advocacy trip that the SAC Metro does in April of 2022, and brought and coordinated a meeting with U.S. Chamber Foundation and our vice mayor at the time, president of Sierra College, and met with U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to talk to them about TPM. 2 months later, it was on the agenda for City Council, and City Council said, we'll give you $270,000 to start the work that you're doing and to bring TPM to Roseville. So it was exciting. But we were not yet prepared. And it was scary. And it took a little bit more outreach and engagement to bring additional stakeholders to the table. Lots of one-on-ones. I know in your study you engage a company to do 50 one-on-one interviews. We engage on our own one-on-one interviews, and we had pretty candid conversations with our members. By the launch of Academy in March of 2023, we were able to have all 4 hospitals at the table. 3 of them were serving on our board. So they were very engaged in the work we were doing. And it took 1 call from Kaiser to UC Davis to say, hey, we're bringing an initiative together to Roseville. 3 of our hospitals are participating. We want you at the table. And UC Davis joined the conversation. That's how we launched at the same time as the start of Academy, the Healthcare Collaborative. Graduation happened in June of 2023. And now we're getting ready to launch both construction and hospitality collaborative, and we're not doing it alone. We actually built partnership for the construction collaborative with the Building Industry Association. And for the Hospitality Collaborative, I reached out and through one of our TPM champion that graduated from the TPM Academy with Thunder Valley Casino, he was able to open the doors to both the Hotel Association and Restaurant Association in the Sacramento chapter. So we built some strong relationships with them, presented at their board meeting, and they were on board to open the door to their membership and just invite their membership to be part of the collaboratives that we're gonna launch in October. And now next steps. The scary part, we're gonna need more funding, and I think that's what we're all here to talk about, is how do we sustain the program and bring more funding. IT Collaborative is gonna be one of the next initiatives we are gonna do, and I'm pretty happy to say this week we had a call, and I think I've secured funding for the IT Collaborative pending approval, but it seems to be 90% secured. So who did we partner with, and how are we looking at sustainability, and who may bring additional dollars to the table? I currently serve on the board of the Golden Sierra Workforce Development Board, so build very strong relationship with their executive director as well as their board chair. Golden Sierra contributed a small amount to TPM Academy and have sponsored about 10 additional people to enroll in the TPM Academy when we brought it to Roseville, so they had some skin in the game. And now they're looking at perhaps sponsoring one of our collaboratives. Another partner is Placer County Economic Development. So while we secured the initial funding from our city, the county was interested. How do you take that initiative countywide? Our county starts from Roseville on the south end and it goes all the way up to Tahoe on the north end of the county. So hospitality is big in Tahoe, and they were curious about how we take hospitality across the county. So there's lots of conversation happening with our Board of Supervisors, the county executive, and their economic development team to see how we can eventually broaden our scope and take the program countywide. Valley Vision is who's gonna be administering the SERV funding. So if you're familiar with California, we're gonna be receiving from the State General Fund about $600 million across 13 regions. And the Sacramento region, the capital region, is one of those 13th region. The initial planning phase has $5 million per region. So you can imagine how a small piece of that pie can create sustainability for the TPM initiative. In addition to that, they're opening Leadership Council nomination to be part of the planning for SERV. And both Jason and Rick, the chair and the executive director of Golden Sierra, and myself are applying to be part of that Leadership Council nomination. Nomination closed at the end of this week. So we're crossing our fingers that we'll get a seat at that table so that we can secure part of that pie for TPM. Sierra College and Los Rios Community College, I know we're employer-led, but our educators have skin in the game, and they want to be part of that conversation at some point. They understand that they can't be part of it in the beginning, but they want to know the outcomes of what the collaboratives are doing. And we've had great success partnering with Sierra College and securing about a grant of $170,000 to place interns within our member businesses. So we've been working on an internship program, and this week we've met with them to hopefully sponsor the IT Collaborative. So that's exciting. I think we'll see more funding coming from there. Kaiser. When we launched TPM, Kaiser came forward with a $25,000 grant. They had leveraged TPM for their commercial construction industry to expand their hospitals. So they understood the value of TPM, and they've already been doing the work. So when they knew we were going to do it for the healthcare industry, they were the first one to step up and say, we'll give you a grant. So the ask is going to go to the remaining hospitals that are now benefiting from the collaborative and say, would you match these funds? And not to forget the city of Roseville. I think the city of Roseville has been participating, actively engaged in the TPM Academy. We had their economic development manager actually participate and be one of our TPM graduate. They've been following the work very closely. They've been very excited about the results so far, even though we've had very small win, and we're in the beginning stages, but they definitely see the value. So could we go back to them and ask them for more funding? It's part of our plan also. This is the initial budget that we submitted. I'm gonna tell you at the time, I had very short period of time in between April and being on the city council agenda in June. You can imagine we had very little time to come up with the plan that we wanted to embark on. But this is kind of the budget that we proposed. It was $100,000 going towards hiring the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to bring the TPM Academy to Roseville. We chose that over the virtual option. Our community likes to engage in person. We felt that the virtual option, even though it could save us some money, it's really not what we would prefer. So we went with the in-person academy, funded for a 2-year manager position at the chamber, as well as some administrative costs. And I'm going to say the lesson learned for us, relationships are key. I think we all know that. So have a vision, believe in your vision, be persistent, and leverage the relationships you have. There are people that will open doors for you, I think, once they believe in your vision. And that's what's been happening to us. Back to the question you asked earlier, we followed a different approach. We were restricted in the funding we could apply for because we're not a 501c3. We were a 501c6. So we have applied for a 501c6, and we just received our IRS tax exempt status. So we're in the process of forming our own 501c3 foundation so we can do more grant application. And I'm going to say, as I just received the tax ID, Lowe's had an opportunity. So Lowe's had a grant application that was due, and they require a 501c3 status. So as soon as we got the tax ID, we were able to submit that application, and we got very excited because that could open the door to much more funding that could be available to us. And I think our biggest risk in our TPM Academy in Roseville is that we are relying on city council dollars for now, City of Roseville funding. So really our strategy is to diversify funding and be able to work with many other sources of funding because we don't want to rely on the city. City council can flip in a matter of one election. But for now, we do have great relationship with them and are leveraging that to gain their support. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and both Cami and I will be happy to answer them.
And then Taylor, I think you had one as well.
Hi, thank you for that great presentation. And I know we're talking about metrics and measurement afterwards as well, but particularly when you're applying for any city grants, state grants, there's so much outcome and metrics and measurement that you have to report out. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I can talk a little bit about our strategy, and we've been really intentional in what we've applied for. We're not just chasing dollars, and so we're really careful as we apply for these grants to make sure it is in alignment with the outcomes that we've defined as an organization. So in the talent space specifically, we have 3 key outcomes that we're working toward, and then essentially we set some interventions within those outcomes that we're tracking from a metrics, and some of them, as I said earlier, are leading indicators. So for example, an intervention could be we're launching 11 collaboratives, and so then we're tracking the number of employers engaged, the number of verified suppliers engaged, and then we talk about the lagging indicators, which is tracking that unfilled job data. So this is all going to be really transparent for us, and so we've got the internal dashboards built. Our team is in the process of tracking that on a monthly basis. We also have some weekly scorecards, those things that if you don't do weekly, you can lose sight of, right? So like for us, it's employer meetings and keeping that active engagement with our employer community and tracking that internally, and then moving to those monthly metrics and thinking then about the long term and having methods to track all of them. I'm happy to share our dashboard template if you're interested in it.
I'm just gonna add, for us, the reason why I turned it over to Cami is I knew she was a lot ahead. We just launched Academy. Our first initial metric was to really be able to engage 25 community leaders in the TPM Academy. That was the first metric, right? How do we get 25 TPM champions that are gonna be going around the community and telling our story, and how can we make a difference? After that, the second goal was to launch 5 different industry collaborative. I did not realize how ambitious that goal is, so I started doing the work. But hopefully by the end of this year, we would have launched 3, so we would have achieved 3, and we asked for a little bit more time from from the city to be able to deliver on the other 2, and they were very understanding as they had started to see how much work it took. So we were very fortunate with our initial grant that we were not required to provide lots of metrics. It was really kind of creating engagement within the community.
So I want to go back to the question about like what is included in your grant requests, and then of course this plays into reporting as well. We've had conversations sometimes internally about like double dipping on deliverables And I just want to get your perspective on that. Like if I write a grant application or a request or a proposal to a company and it has data or a report on it, and then I do the same thing for another company, like I delivered that report, where do you stand on that? Do you think that, is that something that you do, or do you feel like it's better to keep the deliverables like separate on different proposals and asks?
So we definitely blur the lines on kind of what, because we want to be consistent in what we're telling people we're doing. We're not trying to create different proposals for every grant. The outcomes stay the same. What we're cautious of is how the funds are being allocated. So we do have certain grants that employees are covered on, and so we're really cautious that we're tracking that separately, and in QuickBooks have an account that clearly shows that the intent of this grant is to cover that employee only. And so we have internal mechanisms where my payroll person and my financial person, she's going through and she sees exactly what gets allocated to what bucket. It's been a learning curve for us because it takes a lot of tracking, and that's where I was talking about the capacity and just being aware of the fact that the more grants you get, more money, more problems, right? Is you have to have a method for tracking those, and we've had to kind of retroactively build some of those methods, and that has been frustrating, to say the least.
I really don't look at it as double dipping. You're promising an outcome, but you're increasing capacity to do even more work. So I don't feel bad about putting the same outcome, but what I usually include in the proposal and what I put in the City of Roseville, it's in partnership with other sources of funding as well. So I think if you're being honest and saying, this is not our only source of funding, but this is what we're promising to deliver, it really increases your capacity and allow you to do more. We're at the end of the day, we are a nonprofit organization, so we're not really looking at our bottom line. We're more looking at giving back to the community and ensuring the best outcomes possible.
My question is more about the sustainability part in terms of a time frame. Our collaborative is doing really well in securing grants, but I've been telling them that sustainability is going to be the challenge as to whether or not this will be viable for the long term. And I'm trying to propose a window of what we should be looking at. We're looking at 2 years, but I'm telling them if you're not looking at 3 to 5 years, preferably that 5 years, and trying to get the funding for that period of time, then you just have 1 year where you don't have all the revenue necessary. Now you can't deliver the outcomes, and there starts to be some vulnerability in terms of being able to keep it running at the level of quality. So my question is do you have any sense of when you're making that ask? Are you asking for, we need 3 years of funding, you get it all at 1 year and it covers 3 years? Or is it one of those things where it's an annual request that you have to be able to define your need?
I'm so glad you asked this question because it was the one thing I was sitting here going, I didn't talk about this, and it was the most important piece in this conversation. So the way Bold 2026 was defined was that it really is a 5-year strategic initiative. And so we have said we get 5 years to achieve the outcomes we've set forth in this plan. The trick is at 4 years, we go back and do another feasibility study because we do need to reassess exactly what's working and what's not. TPM puts in a lot of structure to that because as the continuous improvement and resiliency planning work will help us to kind of know what those things are live. And then as we get ready to rebuild that plan, we'll have really good data, we'll have really good evolution that we'll be able to show and make recommendations for what needs to happen next. But that's what I loved so much about this model is it's not just funding for today and every year I have to go beg employers. They signed a pledge form that said for the next 5 years, I'm giving you $20,000 or $100,000 or whatever it is that they did. And then we hope, and why it was so important to me that we have great communication around results, is that when I go back to them in 4.5 years, they don't even pause. They say, absolutely, we know this work is working. You've showed that along the way. But it's all those pieces connecting together of the lessons learned that will help us to be able to make this sustainable.
We're at a totally different stage, and I think our approach was, let's bring Academy, let's get buy-in into the program, and then create sustainability. So our initial proposal was for 2 years. We knew we needed 2 years for outreach, for Academy, and to start beginning the work. But we didn't promise results of saying, we're going to solve the problem in 2 years, right? So that was the initial goal for us, is to bring the program, and now we're starting to do the work that they're doing in terms of getting the commitment to create more sustainability long-term. I think the funding right now we're sitting on securing will get us funded for another 2 years. And I think that after that, I'm going to begin looking at more of a long-term 5-year strategy, just like Cammie's doing, in ensuring more commitment from the employers.
And my question went back to the mo money, mo problem. Do you have someone who that is essentially their role to do the reporting, the tracking, the dashboard, the data gathering, or is that kind of become part of what you do? Kind of help us see how that happens.
It's a yes and answer, my favorite kind of answer. So I am working on upskilling an employee that's on our team, our operations person. Right now, she is getting more and more in the grant management. So as part of thinking about our organization's capacity, I know not everyone in here is a chamber, but we've had to really reevaluate the various roles within our organization. And so some of what I've had to give up and others on my team have had to give up to do this work has made us pause and say, okay, and actually just sent an offer letter this morning to a director of member outreach and growth. So some of the work I was doing to build communities and grow our membership base, I can't do anymore because these things are taking capacity. So we've had to really think about where there's gaps and blind spots in our organization and make strategic decisions. But it wasn't for us about hiring a new person to do that reporting and grant management. It was thinking about where's our weak spots and how do we fill those to give capacity? Because I know the reporting and I know where things need to be. I have to be involved in it. We're not big enough for me not to be. So that is how we landed. But I know there's a lot of scenarios in that space.
Okay, I have two questions. So question number one relates to TPM Academy. The people you said, I think you said 25 people went through your academy. What roles did those people hold? And once they completed the academy, what were their responsibilities, or like, what were they supposed to do with that?
It's a great question. It was a very diverse group. So one of the group was the healthcare folks. So we sat them together, we set them at a table, and their role was to actually launch the healthcare collaborative. So we put UC Davis, Kaiser, Dignity, and we also put with them Raley's because we realized that Raley's was coming to the table to talk about, and Raley's is a grocery store in our area, talking about pharma tech. So you'll say why grocery store was healthcare is that they were focusing on pharma tech positions. So we had the healthcare collaborative. So those employers were at the table without anyone else at the table to talk and launch about the healthcare collaborative. We also had some educators in the room. We had Sierra College, we had Sac State, we had our joint high school career counselor, person that works with them on internship and career exploration. We had them in the room. We wanted them to understand TPM, so their role was very different. Their role was understanding the work the chamber was doing so that when we needed them and when we need to reach out to them, they know what we're working on. So we had some people who were there more from a greater understanding of what TPM is. We also had some funders, like we had SMUD in the room. SMUD is looking at maybe funding a TPM collaborative for their subcontractors. So different people had played different roles, but we were very fortunate. Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So we really had great participation, and I could tell you, for example, hospitality, we only had one hospitality member in the room. It was Thunder Valley Casino. It was very difficult to engage in the short period of time we had additional employers to form a hospitality collaborative, but his role became the TPM champion that opened doors to engage more hospitality members in order to be able to launch the hospitality collaborative several months after graduation.
Okay, that's really interesting. And then, just so I understand, the city of Roseville sponsored the TPM Academy seats?
Yeah, they paid for the entire program. So they gave us $267,000. Okay. $100,000 of that was allocated to the TPM Academy.
Okay. So my second question has nothing to do with TPM Academy. I also heard, I can't remember who said it, but at the very beginning, employers were essentially paying to be a part of it, right? How much were you charging? How much do people charge in the room? Like, when an employer participates, what do you ask from them just to get started? I'm curious from everyone.
Yeah, I would love to hear from everyone too. The way we structured it was by size of employer, so it ranged from like $150 to $1,000 for the employer for the year, so it was an annual investment. It was low, but we were just getting going and kind of creating proof of concept. And I think that's really the hard part is once you have proof of concept, it's a lot easier to do those asks. And so you kind of have to roll up your sleeves and start doing the work and then kind of build that long-term funding model supporting it.
$150 per employer?
Yeah.
Do you have like a PDF that says like this is what you get for the
I'm sure I do. That was back in 2017, so I'll have to dig it out, but I can definitely find how we structured invoices for you if you're interested in seeing it. It was good because it gave them a little skin in the game, right? And that was really more our intent than the funding, was to say you're invested. It helped them show up at the meetings, like they understood it was a commitment versus just, you should join us. This is a fun thing we're doing.
And even though our academy was fully sponsored by the city of Roseville, we still charged $300 per person that participated. And we wanted that same thing. We wanted the skin in the game, because if we set a free program, most people won't even show up the 6 days of training that you're hosting and paying for. And the city actually called me. They're like, didn't you say, it's fully sponsored? I said the $300 is going to cover the cost of food for the academy. So we put the $300 per person towards sponsoring lunches and happy hours throughout the academy, so people network and also build strong relationship with each other. And we saw a lot of quick wins coming out of the room from people that connected and actually worked together on collaboration for internship placement and things like that before the end of the program. Like the high school was a SMUD, Union Pacific was Pride Industries. So there were some great partnerships that also came out of the TPM Academy before we even launched collaboratives.
I was just going to mention that we've done some fundraising with businesses, and you don't always get full participation on that. What I have traditionally looked for was an industry champion who would be willing to make the big ask. And you can usually come up with somebody, if you have a major employer in your industry, who's willing to be that champion, but who's also willing to make a big contribution. So we have like one hospital that has funded us for $50,000 each year. And we asked for a 3-year contribution, and at the end of 3 years, we evaluated that and asked for another 3 years. So, I think, then you can start showing results and go to the other ones and say, can you make a contribution? You can see the results that are occurring here. So.
I love that. And in the campaign, we called them example leading pledges. And so we actually were really targeted of who we asked first to invest. And our very first investor was a local realtor. She made a $5,000 a year contribution to this work, which was really big for a local realtor. But you know what that did? When I went in and met with our large manufacturers and our hospital, and I was like, our lead investor starting us off was Vanessa Kendrick, real estate agent. And then they were like, well, gosh, we can't do a $5,000 investment. We probably should do like $20,000 because otherwise, a sole proprietor. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into the how you do asks, but knowing how to use those champions can be really helpful.
All right, I'm Whitney from the Hampton Roads Workforce Council in southeastern Virginia, and we launched it a few years ago, and we've got some big players in the region, and a lot of them have their own talent acquisition teams, and we've been trying to pitch TPM and our team doing it, and a lot of the talent acquisition teams like, that's my job, you're stepping on, and we get a little pushback in that regard, but how, is there any way you guys have navigated around that?
I'd say you start with a higher decision maker. We had engagement from the CEOs, and the CEO kind of sent someone. One good example was Sutter Health. The person that came from Sutter Health was like, what am I even here? When we started TPM Academy, she didn't want to be in the room. By graduation, she was all in. But she was told to be in the room. So sometimes you have to find those that can tell them to be in the room, to be in the room.
The case that we make is it's very hard for those talent acquisition people within companies to build all the relationships that we can bring to the table. So we often, there's no way every talent acquisition manager at a company can build relationships with 30 different colleges and universities, or 15 different high schools, or the Workforce Development Board, or the Economic Development Council, and that's what we can bring as an intermediary.
Please join me in thanking Rana and Cami for a great presentation. So we are now going to head to the Great Hall for lunch. What you'll do is go through the briefing center. Go ahead and grab your lunch. Whoops, all good. No worries. I should have let y'all really leave the room that way. Wow. But yes, head into the briefing center, grab your lunch, and then bring it into the Great Hall. It's a networking lunch, so everybody's been looking at us like, not enough time to talk to folks. It's a networking lunch, so enjoy your conversation. We will start a special program for our TPM Hall of Fame, so I hope y'all will be able to stick around because it's a very, very special program. But yes, please make your way and enjoy. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Oh, good luck. Oh, I lost my computer yesterday. Went to bed thinking that my computer was gone. So you're doing okay. What's that? Me? Deb went to Roseville. Yeah, yeah. Isaiah, I've got your mics.
Hey, oh, thank you. Are we done in here? Great, thank you.